Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the District of Squamish Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, January 22nd. I'm Councillor Pettingale, acting mayor for the month of June, so I'll be chairing the Committee of the Whole. I'd also like to welcome you to Squamish Nation unceded and traditional territory, Squamish, Amway. Just note before we start in that we are celebrating Pride Month, Indigenous History Month, and yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day, which trying to capture it all in the shirt I'm wearing. And just very glad that we can celebrate all these facets of our community. And with that, I will ask for an adoption of the agenda. Can someone move that, please? Councillor French, second by Councillor Stoner. Discussion, no. Anyone opposed? No. Motion carries. Thank you. The next order of business is Ministerial Order M192. That pursuant to the Ministerial Order M192, the District of Squamish is including in-person public attendance at this June 22nd, 2021 meeting on the basis that full public attendance in a manner consistent with public health orders and recommendations cannot be accommodated at this time. And the district is ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability at this meeting by the following means. The meeting is being live streamed. A video of this meeting is available on the district's website for viewing on an on-demand basis, and the meeting is open to the public for electronic participation via WebEx. Can I have someone move that, please? Councillor French, second by Councillor Race. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we'll read out just briefly our procedures. Because this is being held electronically, we have a policy with some procedures. When a council member disconnects or reconnects, please let the chair know so that this can be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Please advise the chair when you wish to speak, and I will place you on the speakers list. With respect to a vote, council members are only required to state a nay vote, and no statement is required to vote in favor. Please put your telephone or computer on mute unless you wish to speak. Everyone is asked to participate in the meetings. Please text either the CAO or our corporate officer if you're having difficulty with your telephone or computer, and we'll recess the meeting for up to 10 minutes if a technical difficulty occurs on the district side, and that results in you being unable to connect. So with that out of the way, I want to note that as everyone has seen, we have a really big day ahead. We have a couple of hard starts, one at 1 p.m. and then one at 3:15. So we need to try and stay on track when we eat into our lunch. And I think we will need a few breaks to stay fresh during today. And as a reminder to everyone, but probably honestly very much, especially to myself, a reminder to not editorialize and just stay focused on questions. So with that, our first item of business is the BC chapter of the Coalition for Healthy School Food, and we have Samantha Gambling. So Samantha, if I can turn this over to you, please.
Sure. Hi there. I'm wondering, am I able to share my screen at all? I have a presentation that goes along with this. Oh, I'm now the presenter. Perfect. Let me see here. Just from the beginning. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. And you can't see anything else. You can just see the presentation there. I have a bunch of things in the background.
Some of the background things might be obscuring. We see a bit of a gray box over top there. Now it's clear.
Now it's good. Wonderful. Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Gambling, and I work for the Public Health Association of BC and the BC chapter of the Coalition for Healthy School Food. I was formerly a resident of Squamish, but today I'm calling in from Powell River, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Tla'amin Nation. And today I'll be sharing some background on who the coalition is, what we're advocating for, and how the District of Squamish can support this work. And in particular, Let me change the slide here. I'm going to request that the District of Squamish add its voice to the growing number of municipalities across Canada who are in favor of a universal, cost-shared, healthy school food program. And I'll get into the specific recommendations at the end of the presentation, but for now, I'll just provide a bit of context here. So studies show that in BC and across Canada, children and youth consume insufficient and unhealthy diets with low fruit and vegetable consumption. This is due to both low food literacy rates as well as issues accessing nutritious food or food insecurity, which we know has worsened during COVID-19. Insufficient and unhealthy diets have obvious impacts on a child's physical and mental health, as well as their academic performance, with long-term public health implications. And in UNICEF's 2017 report card, Canada was ranked 37th out of 41 high-income countries around providing access to nutritious food for children. Around the world, school food programs that support healthy eating behaviors and food literacy from a young age are increasingly recognized as a valuable health promotion policy to address these issues. Schools are a site for effective nutrition intervention and food systems transformation because they reach large numbers of children from all socioeconomic backgrounds, and they are the location where children spend half of their waking hours and consume a third of their daily calories. Studies show that school food programs can benefit student health and well-being, as well as support the broader community and the planet. For example, school food programs have been linked with positive impacts on children's mental health, including reductions in bullying, aggression, anxiety, and depression, as well as fewer visits to the school nurse. So what is the school food program? Generally, it refers to any widespread program that provides food to students at school every day and usually funded and regulated at a national level. Today, Canada is one of the only industrialized nations without a school food program. I should say a national school food program. Here are two photos of school food programs in Japan and in France, where lunch is seen as an educational period, the same as math or reading. So students serve each other and they sit family style, sharing food together in their classrooms. However, there's no one way to run a school food program. So they differ in the type of food that's served, who prepares the food, how it's integrated into the curriculum and the school culture. Even though there's no national funding or regulation in Canada, it does not mean that school food programs don't exist here. So in BC, 75% of school districts actually report having a meal program in at least one school, and this is probably a low estimate. These programs are run at a classroom, school, or district scale, and they rely often on parents or other members of the school community to develop and fund. While there's lots of people doing amazing things around school food in BC, the current patchwork of programming reaches only a small percentage of students and does not meet the need of hungry and undernourished students. And we believe this cannot be improved without significant investment from federal and provincial bodies, which is where the coalition comes in. So as a growing network of over 160 member organizations, the Coalition for Healthy School Food is advocating for public investment in a universal, cost-shared, healthy school food program that will enable all students in Canada to have access to healthy meals at school every day. The Coalition's member organizations include nonprofits who operate breakfast, snack, and other school food programs across the country, as well as program funders, provincial and national health, education, and Indigenous organizations. So these logos you see on the screen highlight just some of our member and endorser organizations here in BC. You can see the Squamish Can logo down there at the bottom. They've been an active member of the coalition. And I also want to note a couple of municipal endorsers, including the City of Vancouver, the City of Victoria, and most recently in Ontario, the City of Toronto. So we're not just asking for any school food program. We're advocating for a high quality program that meets certain guiding principles based on best practices identified by researchers and school food practitioners. So these include universal, meaning that all children and youth in schools have the same opportunity to access a meal or snack provided in a non-stigmatizing manner. Health promoting, meaning that meals ideally model the New Canada Food Guide, focusing on the provision of whole foods and in particular fruits and veggies. And health promoting also refers to healthy school food environments, which means a program should not only focus on what's being served, but how it's being served and engaged with. Respectful, meaning that programs respect local conditions, are culturally appropriate and locally adapted. Connected to communities, supporting local food producers and businesses where possible. Comprehensive, which refers to integration with curriculum through nutrition and hands-on food systems education, sustainable in terms of funding and capacity building, guided by national principles to ensure conflict of interest safeguards, and ensuring Indigenous control over meal programs for Indigenous students. So as a brief update on where we're at with regards to advocacy, the coalition has been advocating for federal investment in school food since 2014. One of the biggest successes was in 2019 when the federal budget included a commitment to work with provinces and territories towards the creation of a national school food program. Since then, unfortunately, there hasn't been much momentum, but this year we are optimistic about the opportunity to push school food forward through the new Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council. And there's also lots of optimism around provincial and territorial action. So here in BC, the BC chapter of the coalition is bringing together stakeholders from diverse sectors across the province to both support the national coalition in their campaigns and also to push school food forward on a provincial scale. So through advocacy, outreach, and research, our goal is to ensure that both federal and provincial governments are consulting and collaborating with school communities across the province in the development of a national school food program. And we've seen some great successes with regards to advocacy in BC in the last couple of years. Following meetings at legislature in early 2020, a budget consultation presentation, and a letter writing campaign during the last provincial election, we were very excited to see that the mandate letters of both the Minister of Education and Minister of Agriculture included a directive to create more local school meal programs in partnership with school districts. So this is a huge step in the right direction, and we're now awaiting more information from the province about the scope of these mandates and how the coalition's network can support the development of pilot projects and a provincial program. So for the big question now, what can the District of Squamish do to support this work? Well, first, we invite the District of Squamish to consider a motion to endorse the Coalition for Healthy School Food and to advocate for a national school food program. By becoming an endorser, the District of Squamish would publicly support the call for a universal cost-shared healthy school food program, and your name would appear on our website alongside other endorsers, including the City of Vancouver, Victoria, and so on. You would also receive updates about our progress and opportunities to engage. And our specific recommendations for a motion that the district could bring forward includes endorsing the ongoing efforts of the coalition to advocate for a universal school food program based on the shared belief that all children and youth in BC and Canada should have access to healthy food at school daily. The second piece is directing staff to provide the coalition with the District of Squamish logo and confirmation of the district support. And then the third piece is directing the mayor to call on the federal government to begin to implement a universal cost-shared healthy school food program. And I have a sample letter that was written to the Prime Minister from the Mayor of Vancouver, if that's helpful to use as a template. So definitely here to support that. In addition to the district-wide motion, as individuals, you can also engage in this work. So you can subscribe for updates on our website, and in that way also receive invitations to engage in campaigns when possible. For example, I think during the pending federal election, our Nourish Kids Now campaign will encourage people to speak with their federal candidates and speak in support of school food. You'd also be invited to attend upcoming events and conversations in BC, such as conversations around the role of municipalities in a national school food program. And lastly, we encourage everyone to share articles, talk with your friends, spread the word, and help build momentum for a universal national school food program. So that's it. Thanks so much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if there's time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gambling. Yeah, we are, I'll try and keep it brief, but Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. My question is really more directed to staff. One of the pieces of the suggested endorsement motion talks about the use of our logo and sharing our logo. And I'd like to know if that matches with our logo regulations. That's not the right word. Acceptable use of our logo.
Ms. Monday.
Yeah. Good morning, Council. Thank you for the question. From what I understand, that anytime Council endorses something, we can support it by adding our logo to the blog.
It's available on the website or download. Yeah. You just have to acknowledge that there's an acceptable use sign on the website.
The short answer is yes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And I'm asking because I'm interested in council support with the suggested motion.
Just before we go, from a process perspective, Ms. Arthurs, if we wanted a bit of time to review all the material and so on and bring it back, what would be the process there?
Thank you, Chair. I would recommend that it get referred to staff, refer the motions to staff to take a look at the implications, especially from the staffing side, and bring back staff recommendation that aligns with the presentation.
Okay, Councilor Race?
Yeah, I'm prepared to move that it be referred to staff, and I'll speak to it if it's seconded.
Okay, second by Councilor French.
I'll speak
go ahead.
too.
Go ahead, Councilor Race.
Thank you. And I'm happy to see this move along, and I think it is a good idea just to go to staff just to make sure we do have all the kind of particulars nailed down. But I know the Rotary Club in Squamish for years, and I'm thinking almost 20 years now, has run a Breakfast for Children program, and Dr. Laurie Broker, who's a local chiropractor, has been instrumental in seeing that program function. And so I know there is a need. There's no doubt about that. And so I'm happy to see this progress. This is certainly something that's worthwhile in probably any school system in Canada, but certainly in Squamish.
Okay, thank you, Councilor French.
Thanks, Chair. And I had the honor of a longer presentation from Samantha Gambling a few weeks ago as part of my participation in the Food Policy Council group. And by the end of that presentation, I was convinced that great work is being done and we should endorse it. So I'll go one step beyond and support this motion. And I'm fully anticipating staff will come back to us with their own recommendation that we pass a motion similar to or exactly as presented by Ms. Gambling. So I support the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything further, Council? Okay, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed to the motion on the floor? Not seeing none, motion carries. Thank you. And
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Just trying to move along quickly here. Are we ready for the BC Transit presentation? Okay, so I think we're going to Ms. Gunn now.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm Dora Gunn, a transportation planner with the District of Squamish. I believe that we have two BC Transit staff here with us today. Can you reconfirm that they're actually here? I just can't see them on my screen.
Yes, I am.
Yep, fantastic. So they'll be providing the presentation today. Their names are Bronson, Bullivant, who's a senior transit planner, and Rob Ringma, who is the senior manager of government relations. So I'll pass it over to them now.
Excellent. Thanks, Dora. Rob Ringma here, as mentioned, manager of government relations. I'm just, for some reason, it doesn't look like I can share my screen. I don't know. Oh, there, the button just came active. Perfect. Thank you very much. Let me find the right screen. Here we go, scroll to. There, and I'm hoping everyone can see that presentation now. Okay.
Yes.
Dora, I'm trusting you, Dora, that all is good. Yeah, so Rob Ringma, Manager of Government Relations, also joined by Bronson Bullivant, who's one of our senior transit planners. Glad to be in front of Squamish Council again today. We do have a pretty meaty agenda, so we'll try to go through it as quickly as we can. I know when Bronson gets into the Transit Future Action Plan pieces, I think what we might do is move to just kind of questions as we walk through it. But as I go through kind of the AOA and some other pieces, maybe probably best to hold some of the questions till the end of the presentation. So we'll provide a quick ridership update. We'll talk a little bit about the annual operating agreement, which I know you have before you in a staff report. I'll expand a little bit on the new program for free transit for children 12 and under. We'll talk a little bit about what we have planned for expansions in January and also some of our future expansion plans. And then, you know, Bronson will kind of take over and talk to you a little bit about the exciting stuff and activity that's been happening with the Transit Future Action Plan. So this graph in front of you, you've seen it before. We kind of present it every time we present and just try to keep updating the data as it goes. The 2019 ridership is shown in blue. 2020 ridership is shown in orange, and this year's ridership is in gray. And again, you can see that large drop in March of 2019 when COVID-19 hit, had that kind of immediate and lingering effect on transit systems across the province. And I apologize, this is a provincial graph, not a Squamish specific graph. We'll get to that graph in a second. The low point ridership, as you can see, bottomed out at basically about 80% of what our pre-COVID ridership was. But as you can see in 2020, the origin line, we saw some good growth throughout the year. And 2021 ridership is, you know, has stabilized, a little bit slower growth. But of course, we're hoping that as vaccination rates continue to improve, people slowly are starting to return to work environments. We're seeing some of those commuter times increasing. And of course, the big one, and you see it in the blue line in September, we're really hoping with the return of a lot of our post-secondary schools to in-class instruction and some, I would say, just a return to normality of some of our other school schedules, that'll help give us another little boost in ridership as we continue to see that ridership grow across the province. BC Transit, as an organization, ridership recovery is basically #1 on our agenda this year. So you'll see a lot of marketing programs, a lot of activity from BC Transit, really trying to encourage people to get back on board, promoting the cleanliness, the safetiness, the reliability of our service, because we all have a vested interest in getting back to those 2019 and beyond on levels. Currently, right now, as you see in the upper right, ridership across the province is still down about 47% versus 2019. And I'll let Bronson speak to.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Sorry.
Hello, everyone. Bronson Bullivant. This image we see here is the kind of the same data in terms of the X and Y axis that we just saw in the previous graph, but specific to Squamish. The number in the top right, decrease in ridership of 23% as compared to the provincial of 47%. That's really good. Ridership has only dropped down 23% of this current week, which we're in, and the data shows for week 23 is the one that we're in right now. If you look at the 3 years, 2019 to 2021, you see there's a big gap on 2019 before kind of the week that we're in right now. That was due to some poor data that we were receiving because our APC systems just kind of came out that year. So after that, the data is pretty good, and there is a missing data point, and that's how I kind of came up with that 23% number. In terms of comparison to last year, we are about 37% up in terms of ridership week over week from 2020 to 2021, which is exciting to see, and the trend continues to go upwards. So with that number in mind, I won't be surprised to see if we shrink that 23% even more coming into September. We can go to the next slide, Rob. So this image here is showing the productivity of each route in Squamish year over year. The kind of the blue line is 2019, the dark green line is 2020, and the light green line is 2021. For Route 5, we don't have any data. We didn't operate it last year, 5 South Parks. We are operating it this year, but there's no data for it just yet, as it just started last week. So what this is telling us is it's a positive story. Productivity is starting to increase on the majority of the routes. The Route 2 is hovering consistently right around right around 11 right now, with the Route 3 and the Route 1 kind of coming back to some semblance of normalcy, as well as the Route 9 is battling back a little bit too, as well as the Route 4. You can go to the next slide, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. I'm back. So in front of you, you do have a staff report that Dora and staff have put together. That references our 2021-2022 AOA. So that AOA includes base costs for your conventional and custom systems, but not for any expansions that we have planned for this year. So it's kind of your base level budget. Of course, any expansions that we do, we'll talk about those in a little bit. Those would be incorporated into your AOA by way of an amendment once that expansion is implemented. So just some high level pieces on your budget for this year. Budgets for revenue and passenger trips will, we've been looking at COVID trends and COVID recovery trends, and they have been based on that. So that revenue would be slightly up from your last year's amended budget, but still forecasted down about 40% from pre-COVID levels. So what I would consider a conservative revenue estimate, but does reflect kind of the realities of what we're seeing in terms of some of the ridership that we just spoke to. From an operational cost perspective, many of the one-time COVID fixed costs that we had to do last year, installation of permanent driver doors, obviously some purchasing some required cleaning equipment upgrades, those were all included in last year's budget. So we don't see those kind of fixed costs carrying through, but we still have additional variable costs, cleaning supplies, PPE, that are related to COVID-19. So we've accounted for all of those in this budget for this year. From a lease fee perspective, if you remember the last time I presented on your amended budget, I spoke about BC Transit applying a 6-month waive of vehicle lease fees. That was a one-time contribution, so that's not baked into this year's budget. But we have seen some continued reductions in our lease fee costs, and that's really due to our fleet purchase program and improved fleet maintenance programs, and it's really helped to lower some of our lease costs, so that's helped. And then just from an additional funding perspective, we've applied the remainder of your shared operating reserve, and we've applied some of your Safe Restart funding, and I'll speak to that a little bit more in detail, that was supplied last year by the provincial and federal governments. So yeah, I'll get into that a little bit more. And also of note, BC Transit has moved our invoicing now to based on actuals. We previously were basing our invoices on budget, but after consulting with local governments across the province in a survey, it came back that that systems would rather us move to invoicing based on actuals. So you won't see any additional shared operating reserve accruing in future years. That's how we used to accrue that. If our budget was higher than our actuals, that extra dollars went into a shared operating reserve. So that operating reserve will get exhausted this year, and then there will not be additional funds in that shared operating reserve. But the good news is you still have dollars in your local transit fund, and I'll speak to that on this next slide. So this slide here is your conventional transit system and budget for 2020-2021. I'll just run through a couple highlights. Revenue, and I'll speak to some of these versus 2019, so kind of pre-COVID. So your revenue is adjusted down about 135,000 to account for those current ridership declines. So that's about a 30% reduction from pre-COVID levels. Operating costs are actually only up 4% versus pre-COVID. As I mentioned before, some cost savings and lease fees help to contain some of those costs in this year's budget. In terms of the additional funding line, I mentioned we applied the remaining $90,000 that you had in your shared operating reserve. And then currently we have it in the actual AOA, we've applied 180,000 of your remaining Safe Restart funding, and that comes out of your local transit fund. Those funds again are there to assist in covering the lost revenue from those ridership declines due to the pandemic. But likely, just in discussions with Dora, and I think you see it in your report, that number will likely be reduced in an upcoming amendment. Because of the delay in the transit expansion that we're implementing this year, it's resulted in lower than anticipated operating costs in your budget. So I think, and I believe it's in the report, but the amount is going to be determined by staff, but I believe they're suggesting to reduce that $180,000 contribution down to $50,000, which will have the effect of pushing more of those local transit funds forward for use in future years. So I think that's a prudent move. So if we remove that local transit fund, your net municipal share of costs is about 1.2 million in comparison to your net municipal share of costs in 2019, which was about 1.1 million. So obviously the hope here is that we continue to rebuild that ridership. As we rebuild ridership, your revenue will recover, and every dollar of that revenue goes to help offset any of those cost increases. So that's a good thing. And the current balance of your local transit fund is very healthy. It currently sits at about $500,000. And again, that can be used as a reserve to buffer future costs in upcoming years. For the custom system, similar trends. Revenue was adjusted down by about $6,000. In 2019, we had about $10,000 booked for revenue, so that's a fairly significant reduction, about a 60% reduction. I'm hoping, again, a conservative reduction, and we see higher revenue levels than that. Operating costs were up. But I mentioned some of the lease fee savings were helping us out, so resulting in net reduction of total operating costs of about 15%. We have applied the remaining operating reserve of $29,000, and we did not apply any local transit funds to your custom system. So again, quick summary. Net municipal share of costs for Squamish is $144,000. In comparison, in 2019, it was $162,000. So actually a small reduction in overall costs, obviously supported with that operating reserve supplied. So I did want to touch on the free transit for children 12 and under. In the budget 2021, the province did make a commitment to making transit more affordable for families throughout the province by offering free fares for children up to and including the age of 12. And then on the budget day, the finance minister actually made that promise a reality and confirmed that the program will start in September of 2021. Obviously, the province, BC Transit, all of our local partners, we kind of share an interest in building a culture of transit ridership, reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. And really, this program is expected to, move us towards some of those goals. But also, I see some benefits in terms of increasing ridership, not only amongst youth, but also hopefully encouraging family travel. And there's obviously an opportunity to create riders for life. So we can get riders started at an early age and they feel comfortable riding the transit system. That will help influence their ridership lifestyle positively. But this is all known to Squamish because you guys already have a program for free fare for children 12 and under. So, you can think of yourself as being progressive. I think it's great. So this program will really come into effect province-wide, but for Squamish, it's pretty much business as usual. The only little bonus that I would talk a little bit about is that we're currently finalizing a contribution agreement with the province that may see Squamish receive some added contribution towards your estimated fare revenue loss that you are currently incurring as a result of offering that program to children 12 and under. So if you can think about it in other systems across the province that aren't currently offering this program, they will see some revenue loss as a result of this program, and the province is working on finalizing a contribution that will affect those systems as well as Squamish. So that should be a positive news story, and I look forward to providing an update soon. And I'll turn it back over to Bronson to just talk a little bit about your upcoming January expansion.
Thanks, Rob. So coming up in January 2022, which was originally slated for 2020, is a 1,500-hour expansion for conventional transit service and an 850-hour expansion for custom service. I split it out here just to help explain specifically what those hours are going towards. With a good chunk of the hours going towards filling in the midday frequency on the 5 South Parks, which approximates about 450 hours. We'll be improving service on the 1 Brackendale and 2 Highlands through the reduction of combination trips. And for those of you who don't know exactly what combo trips are in Squamish, it makes it so we could have more trips operate within the routes 1 and 2. They both travel to Garibaldi Highlands, with the route 2 going out to the Highlands, the route 1 going to Brackendale. The combo trips help reduce the total time of those trips as it kind of takes away the downtown to Garibaldi Highlands connection, and one trip will go to Brackendale and come back and do the Highlands and then come back into town. The issue there is that it does make the trip a lot longer for riders, and it also is kind of confusing depending on how new you are to the transit system. So we sought out to reduce the combo trip that's in the evenings on the weekday, as well as reducing the combo trips on Saturdays to a tune of 410 hours. And we also made the decision to reduce all the combination trips on Sundays to the tune of 285 hours. And the reason for that is through the Transit Future Action Plan engagement, which I'll discuss in a few slides here, we really did hear back about improving the convenience and frequency on the two Highlands was actually the main priority, but also the one Brackendale. So this initiative, this proposal will really help kind of ease the confusion that is currently occurring on the weekends. And it also helps improve on-time reliability as the bus doesn't take as long to run its route. On that note, we're also looking to make on-time performance improvements throughout the entire year. Scheduling's done a great job at keeping that cost to about 200 hours. So you'll see that a couple of the trips throughout the schedule, depending on the time of day, will have added a few extra minutes to ensure that the buses are running on time, which we're really excited about. And following that, we did make the decision to improve the morning span on the two Highlands by about 1 or 2 trips. We're not really sure exactly how the scheduling is going to work, but we're hoping for 2 trips on the morning there, because right now service starts at about 9:30. So we're really hoping to people that do work earlier can utilize that specific bus. We'll also be investigating the opportunity for additional frequency on the one Brackendale to assist with the heavy school loads. We will be getting a medium duty bus in January. It is intended to be used for that midday gap on the 5 South Parks, and that's why we can't do it this summer. But during the school year, when the 5 South Parks is not running, we'll be able to use that bus during those peak times. And for custom transit, we'll be distributing a survey to see whether or not handicap riders would like to proceed with extended weekend service or later evening service. Just one thing I want to add on to this. I know that the last time we came to council, we discussed adding on introductory service to the Route 9 West University. That was further investigated through the engagement. And it was actually, we heard it was a question on whether or not they wanted to go ahead with the Route 4 Garibaldi introductory service, the Route 9 Quest University. If you, as you review the public engagement summary report, you'll see that the Route 4 Garibaldi was actually what was supported most. But it was determined after we kind of went through the meat and bones of the expansion of the midday service on the 5 South Parks and the on-time performance improvements, we just wouldn't have enough hours to create a useful schedule on weekends for either the 4 Garibaldi or the 9 Quest University. When I get to the public engagement results, I can kind of talk more about why one was chosen over the other in a little bit more detail about that. You can go to the next slide, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Bronson. And so one more slide before we can get into some of those insights, which I'm sure everybody's thinking about. But we did just want to touch base on kind of future transit priorities. So what you have in front of you here is our future transit expansions. And these are the remaining ones that are in our transit improvement program list. For fiscal 2022-23, we do have a 3,000 hour expansion planned that will see us moving forward with some of the finalized initiatives from the TFAP that Bronson's going to speak to. And as we move to increase some of the peak service in Squamish, this expansion does come with a bus request for 3 medium duty buses. But one challenge we've uncovered as we're working through this is the fact that BC Transit's medium duty bus contract has actually expired, and we're not in the position to procure additional medium duty expansion vehicles for 22-23. So sounds like clearly something we need to work through, but as BC Transit, we manage our provincial fleet. Bronson and I are currently working to look into opportunities to shuffle vehicles between systems to accommodate a medium duty bus expansion in 22-23. And I think once we have determined the final list of kind of all of our expansions, we'll have a better idea and be able to better assess that opportunity. In addition, With the additional bus we'll be acquiring this year, we'll be looking to see how we can maximize the utilization of that resource for in the system, and also look for where we can find some quick wins in terms of non-peak hours only expansions that can also happen in 22-23. So again, Bronson and I are working hard with Dora and your staff currently to kind of plan out those options in the event we're unable to acquire medium duty buses for this expansion. And once we have navigated and got a little bit more detail there, we'll come back before council in the fall with an official MOU for service expansion to be considered. So now I'll flip it back to Bronson, and he will walk us through the Transit Future Action Plan update.
Awesome. I think this is the last transition, so hopefully it's not been too confusing. To give just a quick overview of what the TFAP's purpose is we're looking into what are the strategic and prioritized investments that will be needed over the next 1 to 5 years and beyond to achieve Squamish's goal for transit. So it's a short range route and system level transit plan. We sought out to start engagement back in March of 2020, but was delayed due to COVID. So we ended up starting the public engagement in March 2021. We also did an onboard intercept survey, which is crazy to think about now, but included people going on buses and talking face-to-face to people and asking what they thought was important for the transit system. That was back in February 2020. It was also a part of a customer satisfaction survey that's done province-wide. So the online engagement that we completed in this past February and March included an online survey as well as an interactive project page. One of the neat parts about it was we included a mail-out invitation that addressed all of Squamish. We haven't done that historically for TFAPs, but it was really useful because it enabled us to reach not only current transit riders like the intercept survey did, but it also reached non-transit riders. So it gave us some insight onto what might be the best way forward to get new riders onto the bus. So some quick stats below. The main one is that we had about 700 online survey respondents, and we had about 500 fully complete surveys. And just to give some comparison, when we did the Transit Future Plan for the Sea to Sky region, which was completed back in 2015, those same numbers are what we got for the entire region. So we had about 500 fully completed surveys for Squamish, Whistler, and Pemberton. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of how successful we were with this survey. Go to the next slide. Thanks, Rob. So yeah, as I mentioned before, our next steps are to prioritize the investment for the next 5 years. Both infrastructure and service level proposals will be included. So in the plan, we'll make recommendations to how to improve and change service based on the frequency of buses and the span, and routes. So if we're suggesting any changes to routes, we'll include that as well. But not only that, as a huge part of changing the routes and service levels in Squamish, we'll also have to include infrastructure improvements, such as siting a location for new transit exchange, and then smaller projects such as improving bus shelters in Squamish. So the draft plan, the goal is to have it done and circulated by the end of August, with the goal to come back to discuss it in October on the next council meeting. So just a timeline below of the goal is to integrate into service planning. It should say October 2021, and hopefully it'll inform the following tips 22, 23. Next slide, Rob. Sorry. That's all good. It could have been easier if I was doing it, so sorry about that. So yeah, if you just click next, Rob, I'm just gonna get to the first one. The survey was broken into multiple subject areas. So the engagement summary report is pretty dense. If you do have it handy, there's a lot of graphs in it, a lot of images, a lot of text. So what I'm gonna do today is just go over the key findings of each section. And if you have any questions or comments that you want to talk about at the time, if you have the document handy, please let me know and we can stop and we can chat about it. So the first subject that was kind of asked and brought up was how COVID-19 had impacted respondents' travel patterns. So the main thing that we saw there was about 60% of the respondents were impacted. Their travel patterns were impacted due to COVID-19. Expectedly, transit usage was decreased significantly, with single occupancy vehicles, biking and walking all increasing. This didn't necessarily impact a specific proposal, but how COVID has impacted riders will definitely influence how we prioritize our investments based on specific trip times that they might be using more. What we found across the province is that people are using the bus a lot more during the middle of the day, and that's still a consistent trend. So that's how we can use that data to help support some of the other proposals that we have. Go to the next one. So as I mentioned before, we did get some really good feedback about riders that don't currently use the bus. So we asked them specific questions as to why they didn't use it and what might make them want to use it more in the future. So the leading reason was lack of ridership for non-transit riders was the infrequency and the convenience factor of transit. An important factor to gain new riders is to focus on the afternoon frequency for recreational trips and shopping trips. So that first point, leading reason the lack of ridership was infrequency of transit and convenience. That is really supported by our goal to remove the combo trips. Removing the combination trips will really improve the convenience of transit. Also, it's going to, think about it, it'll actually double the frequency we have along that core network connecting downtown to Garibaldi, because we'll be operating both buses all the time rather than just combining them north of Garibaldi. So it's a pretty spot on quick win for us out of this TFAP. You can go to the next point. So the next section we broke it up into was defining current transit service and also future transit service. The first point and the first subject we discussed was weekend service. Out of that onboard intercept survey, we asked what current riders' priority was, and a lot of them said to improve weekend service. So the number one improvement was improving early morning service on the two Highlands. And as, again, with the January 2022 expansion, we will be looking to add frequency onto that. The next couple of improvements that were the top priority were actually improving evening frequency, as well as adding on to the evening span on the two Highlands. There were a lot of other, we asked about every route, and every route had different priorities, but these were just the top ones. And as I mentioned before, respondents also wanted to see introductory service on the 4 Garibaldi over the 9 Quest University. And we kind of were wondering why this might be the case. When you look at the data, there's, in terms of total daily riders, the 4 Garibaldi has always kind of been a lower performer. Right now, we have about 30 riders a day, and the 9 Quest University has about 130 riders. So if you're just looking at the data, you would say that we should be focusing on where the riders are. But what we thought that the reason why respondents might have indicated that the 4 Garibaldi was the one to proceed with was because of the service area. On weekends, the 2 Highlands actually does cover a good section of Quest University, where the 4 Garibaldi does not have service. So in future years, and it'll definitely be a proposal that comes out of the plan, is to introduce introductory service on the 4 Garibaldi if the ridership picks up with COVID-19 kind of petering off and vaccination rates going up. You can go to the next subpoint, Rob. Thank you. So another question that we asked during the time of this survey, we weren't really sure the direction COVID-19 was going to take. We weren't sure if it was going to be persistent, depending on how vaccinations were going to go. So we asked a question on, if you had to prioritize trip windows for every single route in Squamish, where would you want to focus resources? With the most important time still being that 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. slot, which is essentially the peak service in the afternoon, people coming home from their school, high schools, or from work, followed by kind of the later morning, which kind of makes sense, the 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., kind of which jives with current travel patterns of people using the bus more in the middle of the day, followed by the classic AM peak, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Go to the next point, Rob. We also asked questions on the 5 South Parks. It has been very successful. It was very successful in 2019. Last year we didn't have any ridership data, obviously, but we're looking to how we can improve it and make it more usable and friendly and convenient to residents in Squamish. So the most important priority was to extend the duration of the service, followed by expanding the service frequency in the midday. Makes sense when there's not a whole lot of frequency in the midday right now, but the next goal of the South Parks will probably be to extend the service by 2 months. Other comments, open text comments, included having year-round service, as well as providing service to Klahani Park. And ironically enough, we are going to be serving Klahani Park this summer. We already are, with the change from going into Shannon Falls to Darrell Bay. So we actually had a few respondents in the open text subject area that included that they wanting service there. Why does it go to Shannon Falls and not service our area? So another quick win that came out of our recent service change. Go to the next slide. So the Route 4 Garibaldi, we asked a pretty quick question on whether or not they respondents supported the recent change we made. So a couple years ago, it was called the 4 Tantalus, and it served the business park as well as Brennan Park before going into Garibaldi. That was changed, I believe, 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now. And it was to provide a more frequent service, circumventing the business park, circumventing Brennan Park, going directly to Garibaldi, which was supported by a great deal in the public engagement. It was funny that a lot of people did say that they thought that it would be a great option to provide express service between downtown and Garibaldi, even though the ridership was so low. So I think what the public engagement really spoke to, and it's not specified anywhere specifically, but I think doing a better job advertising for Garibaldi through our marketing campaigns could be very successful at getting people on the bus, because it does provide that express service between those two locations. We also have to focus on making appropriate transfers on at the Garibaldi Village location. So moving into future transit.
Just before you go into the next section, doing a time check. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I would like a bit of time to answer questions and comments.
Sounds good. It's coming up to the end now. Thank you. So with the future transit service section, we asked a couple of questions on if we were to change service in the next 5 years, how would we want to make that change? And our big goal in Squamish is to change how the structure works. Right now, we have kind of a pulse system where everything comes back, all the buses come to downtown and go up from there, which is great for smaller systems, but Squamish is growing rapidly. And we really quickly realized that on-time performance is an issue because how long the routes are and so many people boarding the bus at different times. So the one way to make a change, to make it more successful and really set ourselves up for the future, is to create an FTN strategy. And an FTN means a frequent transit network strategy. It's explained pretty well. It was explained pretty well in the survey, and it was explained briefly in the engagement summary report. And a map here kind of shows what the vision is, and it's really to create a new transit exchange at Garibaldi Village and have a lot of buses going between those two locations, with transfers made to Brackendale, to the university, to Valleycliff, as well as connections, more local connections elsewhere. So those small arrows would indicate a frequent level of service as well, with the most frequent between downtown and Garibaldi Village. So it was supported very heavily. About 96% of respondents supported this initiative, and we'll take this further to another study that we've had done across the province to help create a network for us and move forward with that. You can go to the next slide, Rob. So probably the most contentious question we asked on the survey was how Brennan Park is serviced. For those of you who don't know, essentially all of the routes other than Route 4 and Route 5 do service Brennan Park. So what that means is that there's a lot of opportunities for people utilizing that area to use the bus, but it does create an opportunity for the buses to slow down, and it doesn't necessarily jive with what a frequent transit network should be, which is direct service without taking deviations. So that specific question asked a lot of options of, if you do you think it's a key destination? And if you don't think it's a key destination, how else could we serve it? If we could serve it with one of the routes or with multiple routes. It was pretty much a 50-50 split of if people believed it was a key destination or not. So there's definitely gonna be some more work between ourselves and local staff to determine the best path for that moving forward, but we'll bring that forward and with some options in the future to council. Go on the next slide, Rob. And servicing new areas was also a question that we asked. It's a little difficult when we ask this question, because if those areas don't have population yet, it's really hard for those residents to provide support for that area. So that's definitely noted. But a top priority was providing seasonal service to Alice Lake, so kind of a North Parks route, similar to the South Parks route, as well as providing year-round service to what we have in the South Parks. Oceanfront and the Britannia Beach area were the next key destinations to providing service. Next slide. So the sustainability funding, this question was created with support from the district, and we essentially asked a few different questions on how respondents in Squamish would want to support transit-oriented development, essentially. They're broken down there in the slide, but it was interesting that we had such support for a variation of ways to improve transit density or density on transit routes, as well as funding sources for transit. So 33% of respondents felt pay parking should be used to disincentivize driving, and 55% of the respondents supported increased density along transit routes, which is potentially one of the goals of the updated OCP. Go to the next slide, Rob. Oh, that's it zoomed in. Sorry, I think go to the next one. That's all good. I should have known that. Open text comments. We had a lot of open text comments, a huge chunk. It was hundreds and hundreds of them, but we didn't specifically separate or include questions around regional service. We noted that at the start, it was not going to be included in the Squamish DFAP, but it still came up a lot. So improving frequency of transit in general was a main goal, but also providing service to Whistler and Vancouver. Another goal was improving on-time performance, as well as the desire for more shelters, as well as the desire for free service. And that summarizes the TFAP key findings, opening up to questions now. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So council, we have a brief bit of time for some questions, and there is a recommended resolution before us as well. So council, any questions? Councilor Rice, and then go ahead, Councilor Rice.
No, thank you. No, I had difficulty unmuting. Actually, it wasn't a question, but that was a helpful presentation. But the thing that just caught me right at the very end was the statement about need for more shelters. And so I don't know, and I know in past years we've from time to time got into a sort of a flurry of shelter building in Squamish. But I just might leave the comment out there for staff to consider. Do we have enough? Are there some notable gaps in that program? And should we get back on sort of a budget program of building some shelters each year? And I'll just leave it to staff to kind of consider that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Elliott, and then Councilor Stoner.
When we look at the feedback from the survey, frequency of transit was the #1 issue. So with the changes for January 2022, how close did we get to a 15-minute service on any of our routes?
With the changes, thank you for the question. With the changes, we definitely improved frequency between Garibaldi Village and downtown. What I believe it would be when the combo trips are existing, which is on the weekends, between an hour, and I think that would be decreasing to 30 minutes. So not 15 minutes yet, but we're definitely working towards it. To really add the ability to have 15-minute service with the buses that we have right now is going to be very difficult. The next step would be to utilize those bus expansions to start adding in frequency. We have about, for those of you who care, we have about 6 of our 8 buses on the road at any given time. We need those 2 buses in the shop for if something breaks down or when there's mechanics working on it. So we are at peak pull-out. We have no ability to add any more buses onto the road until we do add buses into the system, which we will be doing in January. So with that, we might be able to add a 15-minute frequency on Route 1 in the morning peak, but that's kind of where we're at now. So we're working towards it, although slowly.
Okay, so maybe when the Transit Future Plan comes back, you can actually address that as how we get to 15-minute service on our routes. Like, what kind of investment would it take? That would be a really helpful thing to allow council to see into the future. I noticed that the frequency map, so the fast service, doesn't include the business park. But that's a major employment area. It also includes a really affordable grocery store. And so how do you make sure that when we have these routes that are bypassing those things on the highway, that we can still make sure people have fast connections to where they work?
Totally. It's a good question. And that map is supposed to be, I did my best with it. It's supposed to be a visionary line where we don't know exactly what route it's going to take. So the next step out of that will be working with a consultant to get into the system and through more engagement determine specifically where that FTN line will be, which might include the business park, depending on the travel time and density along the corridor. So if, as you said, the employment and residential density qualifies it to be where the FTN route should be, then so be it. But it's not decided that that specific line will be exactly where the route takes, or the route goes.
Okay, my last question is that the Oceanfront Development Park is starting this summer. And so when the future transit plan comes back, it would be helpful for council to see when service begins to the oceanfront. We just approved a DP for a restaurant that seats over 100 people. There's a major employer down there in carbon engineering and other progress in the making on the oceanfront. So right now, we don't really have a timeline for when that starts to be incorporated into our network. And I really think we should, if we want to discourage people from always taking their car down there. Thanks, Chair.
Good, thank you. Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, I was just curious, in the staff report, there's reference to a policy in the Sea to Sky Transit Future Plan around increasing transit mode share to 2.5% by 2020. And I'm just wondering if we know where we're at in that percentage. I wasn't able to glean it from the staff report.
Through the chair, we have not recalculated that, actually. It's a tricky one to calculate, so perhaps Bronson and I can work together and see if there's any way we can come up with a number in the Transit Future Action Plan. The last number that we had did come from the previous Sea to Sky Transit Future Plan, so yes, we can put our minds to that and see what we can come up with.
Yeah, it'd be great to get an update of that. And then just, I was excited to see the concept around the frequent transit network. I think that might provide a lot of flexibility, but was also curious around kind of like the stops along the way, and if there's, recognizing that might be going down the highway, but is there any opportunity for it to like stop on the highway? I know it technically does in Whistler. Or is that just like a no-go in terms of being able to put transit stops on or close to the highway?
Through the chair, so the line on the map is not intended to be the actual route anyway, so it's quite likely, at least in my mind, I think, that we probably stick to the government road route just because it services a lot of folks along the way there. Not a given, but it was just kind of a high-level concept. As far as running so we do run along the highway for the Route 4 as well as other parts of other routes, and it is possible to have stops on the highway. So that's something that we can look into, but I think running all the routes down the highway is probably not the best plan just because it doesn't take people to where they need to be.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I just would kind of like envision like in Vancouver, they have like the 99B line that's just like, it goes from point A to point B with a few stops along the way. And then there's other pieces that kind of feed into it if you need to go off the main route. So, but curious to see that come back in the fall. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anything more, Council? Not seeing any more questions. We do have a recommended motion to execute the annual operating agreement for 21-22. Someone wanna move that? Councillor Herford moves. Councillor Stoner second. Any discussion? Councillor Stoner?
I will just say that I'm excited to see that we are going forward with our expansions in January 2022. I know those were delayed, so it'll be great to see that level of frequency increase and that it has been already informed by the community engagement. So hopefully that increases ridership even more. Thanks.
Okay, Council, anyone else? I'll just add for myself that this is so key. Transit is so key to a lot of our vision and plans for a livable, walkable community that just is built around people. And so I'm really excited to see where we are actually, despite the COVID pandemic, and excited to see this move forward. So thank you. Final call to question. Anyone opposed? Seeing no one opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay. And do we have Ms. Dicker? Yeah. Okay. So I will be meeting over to Ms. Dicker for the community grant agreement amendments.
Good morning, Council. I'm just waiting to be passed the torch. Good morning, Council, and thank you for your time today. I'm cognizant that you have a large agenda in front of you, so I'm going to try and move through this as quick as possible for you. So my name is Sarah Dicker, and I'm the Manager of Arts and Culture for the District of Squamish, and I'm here today to present to you some amending agreements for the community grant agreements. So an overview of what we're going to talk about, the purpose behind today's presentation, a little bit of background on the community grants, some considerations that arose from the first year of the process moving externally, and the actual amendments to the agreement, as well as some recommendations for Council. So the purpose today is to gain Council approval on the proposed amendments to the community grant agreements with the Squamish Community Foundation and the Squamish Arts Council. And for those of you at home, I'll be referring to them throughout the presentation today as the community grant organizations. So background on this file, to refresh our memories. In 2019, Council directed staff to find an alternative model to delivering the community grants through non-for-profits. And since then, we have adopted a new policy for community grants in October of 2020, and then Council subsequently approved the agreements with the Community Foundation and the Squamish Arts Council in November. The two community grant organizations launched their new grant programs in February and ran their first process. A report was brought to the CAO in accordance with the community grant policy and approved in March. Funding was awarded in March and April of 2020. And following that, staff and both community grant organizations reviewed the process of the first year. So what went well in the first year? The community grant organizations showed excellent collaboration in terms of marketing, timelines, the holding of an information session for prospective applicants to go through any changes that were occurring with the new process. The community were very familiar with the previous process, so this was just in order to ease them into the new process. Communication channels were absolutely open between both organizations, staff, and the public. And assistance was provided to applicants to help determine the best grant to apply for, knowing that they couldn't apply for both. And also the community grant organizations kept their channels open to double check when the application timeline closed to make sure that there was no duplicate applications and to eliminate any problems prior to the review and award of funding. The creation of a matrix was established to assist with the review and deliberation, and that was based on the principles of the community grant policy, which provided an improved deliberation process than the previous community grant system and guided fair decision making. And the community grant organization's relationship with staff is continuing to grow and strengthen. We have implemented a check and balance system in the community grant policy, whereby the final reports before the dissemination of funding come to the CAO and CFO. And no issues arose through that. Both organizations were very diligent in their review and compliance with any regulations established that we need to follow. And we also had no complaints received by the public, which was excellent. So considerations that arose from year one. Year one was always going to be a learning curve with the new shift to these external grant organizations. And we definitely kept the communications channels open, as mentioned before, and tried to work through any kinks that arose in the system as we're getting used to the new process. And so coming out of the first year, some considerations were established in the reports to the CAO, and they include mainly concerns around the timeline and the time constraints. So both organizations had the desire to be able to disseminate funding in January, giving applicants a year-long period to complete their projects. Previously, through council's old process, the grants were disseminated following the budget approval. And so initially, the agreements when they were first drafted reflected that same timeline. Knowing that our agreements are now embedded in the 5-year financial plan, we have the ability to release the funding as early as January, as soon as we enter the new fiscal year. And so that will shift and improve the process for both the organizations and also the recipients of funding, giving them that extra time. It also allows more year-round programming and projects so that we're not seeing a dip in programming or projects from the January to April range as is currently the case. And then moving on to some other points that came up, we had consideration for multi-year grants, and so staff recommend that both grant organizations work with staff and through the CIO report that they request these multi-year grants and that we don't extend those beyond the term of the agreement, knowing that we can't promise funding that they haven't been given basically past the expiry of the agreement. And the final point was on clarity on disseminating funding to religious or political organizations. And so staff recommend that the organizations, the community grant organizations, continue to reference the principles of the policy and to use their established matrix in the deliberation of granting, and that the focus be based on the actual application and the merits of that application, and not focused on who the application was submitted by. And if we were to further clarify this point, it would require a more in-depth policy review, which at this time staff do not recommend. So the actual amendments being proposed are very simple and minor. So we propose moving the under the services and funding, removing March 1st and replacing with January 31st. And that is basically giving staff a tighter timeline to release funds to the community grant organizations and the recipients of the grants. And then the December 1st replacement with September 15th is referencing the annual submission of the community grant organizations plan for the year of granting to staff, and both organizations are happy to shift those dates forward, knowing that actually it is more work for them in this year that they're going to have to run 2 grant programs in 1 calendar year, but just to get that running on track with the fiscal year, they're both open to that change and actually suggested it. And so moving into the recommended motions, staff recommend that the District of Squamish approve the amendments to the Community Grant Squamish Community Foundation Grant Agreement as presented at the June 22nd, 2021 Committee of the Whole, and that the General Manager of Community Services be authorized to execute the amended agreement. And also that the District of Squamish approve the amendments to the Squamish Arts Council Grant Agreement as presented at the June 22nd, 2021 Committee of the Whole, and the General Manager of Community Services be authorized to execute the amended agreement. And that is all I have today for my presentation. Thank you for your time, Council, and I will take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Council, any questions? Just getting my view up here. I can see everyone. So Mayor Elliott.
Thank you, Ms. Dicker. I'm wondering, we saw the annual reports from both the organizations, but they haven't presented, or they didn't in the same way. And can we standardize how they report back to council?
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Mayor Elliott, for your question. They will be reporting back to council, and that is coming in the third quarter, and that was, the fourth quarter, and that was in alignment with council's previous budget deliberation. And so they will be coming forward with a report at the end of the year. It also is in alignment with the actual recipients of the grants being able to report back to the Community Foundation upon the completion of their programs. And so we know that not all of the funded programs will be completed at that stage, but we'll have a good idea of who is completed and what's yet to be finished off. And so we think it will be a more suitable time to come back to council once that kind of the year end is upon us.
So in the earlier reports we had this year, you could see that the Arts Council provided their matrix for their decision making, but the Community Foundation did not. And neither organization provided any, even a short description of what the project was for.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe those matrices were provided to staff, in particular the CAO and the CFO who reviewed them. Apologies if they weren't included for council on the agenda, but I can definitely either A, share them with council, or B, publish them on the community grants page for information. That was definitely provided to staff and reviewed by staff.
Yeah, I just think as council oversees the policy, we want to make sure that the matrix that both organizations are using reflect the OCP goals, as well as the where we want to see the grants funded, and we list in the policy that it's around, a number of different things. So it would just be nice if there was sort of both organizations were presenting that in a similar fashion when they're reporting out. I disagree with staff's assessment that we should allow these organizations to decide on religious and political. Council historically didn't award grants to religious organizations or for political reasons, nor did we support sports jerseys and that sort of thing. So I actually think that if they're asking the question, then our policy isn't clear enough. Because we talk about arts and culture, community and neighborhood events, decolonization and reconciliation, intergenerational programming, neighborhood connectivity, public space activation, environmental stewardship, social well-being, and youth-led initiatives. So if we need to tighten that up, I would prefer to do that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, on the item of the multi-year grants, appreciate the general direction of staff recommendation. But when we previously did this, we did kind of put a cap to the percentage of that could be multi-year grants. I wonder if that was considered by staff at all, and if we'd want to do something like that going forward.
Thank you, through the chair. This hasn't been contemplated by staff, and I think that the shift externally was supposed to allow the Community Foundation and the Arts Council to determine their own processes based on our policy and what they believed was fair as community grant providers and experts in those fields. If council wished to put a cap on that, that is an amendment to the policy that would have to be added. And so I'm open to hearing council's thoughts if they wish to provide that cap and what that is contemplated to be.
Thank you. I think I would support just a general cap. It could be relatively high, 40 or 50%, but I do think that it is important to keep a certain amount of the annual granting available for single year grants and it not get eaten up over multi-year grants too quickly. And I would also support the mayor's suggestion of tightening up the policy language to not include funding for political or religious reasons.
Okay, not seeing any more hands, so I'll make a couple of comments. I'll also go to Council Race first, actually.
Thank you. And I just wanted to add the comment with respect to the political and religious grants and other types of grants that we didn't support before. And for me, it was one of the things that early on we started to get away from was grants to sports organizations, as worthy as they are, you know, minor soccer, minor baseball, and things like that. And where I was coming from, and it was a personal decision, I don't know if it was a council decision, but where I was coming from is that those are not considered to be charities by the Canada Revenue Agency, which always gave me a little bit of guidance on the types of things that I thought were appropriate for these grants. Sports clubs are not. And so that also kind of got into our permissive tax exemption policy, and we kind of tended to follow the same thing. We didn't give one to the yacht club or the flying club or things of that nature because they're sports clubs. They have certainly community value, but they just weren't the types of organizations we thought. So I think there is a discussion around that. Council seems to sort of maintain some core principles over the years spanning different council terms, and I think we might want to see those tightened up and go out into the community as well. Thank you.
Just add my 2 cents. I would appreciate a bit more discussion in the future about political and religious. I think just briefly in my mind, less comfortable with the political party, but if we just say political in general, and I want to know exactly what we mean by that. There are things, you know, that I think might be acceptable, but political parties I wouldn't be as comfortable with. And the line between a religious group that's also just a community group, I'm not sure I want to stop that, but promoting a religion as your primary purpose, not so sure I'm comfortable with that, but maybe that speaks to looking at the purpose of these grants and what they're actually trying to achieve. So maybe there are some just small tweaks we can make, but it sounds like it is a worthwhile discussion for the future. So if there's nothing else from council, we do have a couple of recommended motion with 2 clauses. I'm wondering if you can get that back up on the screen. Mayor Elliott?
I'd like to add another that to the, so I'll move the staff recommendation and add another that staff bring back a policy amendment for discussion at a committee whole to limit grants to religious, political, and sports organizations.
Second.
Thank you. Did you want to speak to that, Mayor Elliott?
I think we want to make these changes quickly so that we can accelerate the timeline. So I don't want to get in the way of that, but I do want to signal to these organizations that we're not comfortable with grants to religious, political, or sports teams. And so I just want to sort of make sure that these changes go through to support the timeline for this year, and that staff can bring us something back in the fall that addresses those concerns.
Thank
But
you,
I'm really appreciative of the work that was done. Thank you.
Sorry about that, Councilor Race.
Oh, I had nothing to add, actually. I was just had my hand up to second. Thank you.
So, sure no one else has their hand up. And not seeing any further discussion, I'll call a question. Anyone opposed? Not seeing anyone opposed, so motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
And we have earned ourselves a bit of a break. Oh, we did move all of them. It was just the first set. Okay, my apologies. Can we get those back up?
I moved the entire staff recommendation with an additional that.
That's what my understanding was.
Through the chair, there's 2 separate motions for both agreements, and I think it's recommended that they're done separately.
Oh, So the first one was for the Community Foundation grant. So I'll move the Squamish Arts Council grant with the same addition.
Okay, so that's moved. Councilor Swanner seconds. Any discussion? Not seeing any hands. Anyone opposed? Doesn't look like it. Motion carries. Okay, thank you for that. So we are due back at a short recess, and we'll come back at quarter to 11. Thank you. Back, everyone. A few beeps there. Welcome back, I think. I think we're all here now. And we're committed a whole for Tuesday, January 22nd. And next topic is usually for dog off leash areas and the animal control bylaw. Mr. Paisley, to you.
Good morning. I believe Terry's just going to load up the slides, but while she's doing that, I'll just introduce the topic. Good morning, Mayor and members of Council, as well as the community viewing audience. My name is Dan Paisley, Acting General Manager of Corporate Services. Joining me hopefully today, if we do require questions through Q&A, will be Tiffany Blazak, our District of Squamish Animal Control Officer. I know at the time we spoke a minute ago, she was having technical difficulties getting on, but hopefully she'll be on, as well as Sandra Basego, who was the consultant who originally was on this project back in 2019, if required to answer some questions. This morning, the purpose of this brief update to the Committee of the Whole is to bring you up to date on the activities regarding the proposed dog off-leash areas and animal control bylaw project that was brought forward originally in 2019. We want to bring this forward prior to re-engaging the public to you and to inform Council and the public as to the next steps, again, emanating from the 2019 community engagement regarding the proposed dog off-leash areas. As many of you know, with the growing population of dogs and dog owners in the community, District of Squamish has identified the need to address off-leash dogs, owner responsibility, and to update the animal control bylaw to reflect many of these new particular off-leash areas and owner responsibilities. Planning for this particular project began back in 2019. Next slide, please. Extensive external engagement was undertaken in 2019, which included online survey with over 900 responses, representing quite a high rate of completion, 85%. An open house with 50 members of the public in attendance and 204 online comments received back in 2019. The focus at that time was on engagement was looking at suggested locations and times for off-leash areas. Next slide, please. At the onset of the pandemic in early 2020, bylaw staff turned their focus to emerging priorities, and the project was deferred to 2021. In 2021, staff refocused attention on the project and engaged with internal stakeholders for feedback from various departments within the district, including planning, parks, environment, wildlife, the RCMP, and the Provincial Conservation Officer Services. Based on past and recent engagement, staff have identified some challenges with the original proposed sites and will be presenting additional options to the community for feedback in this next proposed engagement period. As a follow-up, the animal control bylaw will be updated following community engagement. This is to ensure that it is aligning with the measures to support off-leash areas, owner responsibility, and animal welfare. Next steps, through months of July and part of August, we will be back engaging with the public on off-leash locations and times. Bylaw staff during this period will also collaborate with other district departments to review and address any concerns related to each of the proposed sites prior to putting them forward for public engagement, including issues such as land access. In early September 2021, staff will bring back a report to Council with the public engagement results, bring forward off-leash site recommendations, as well as introduce the amended animal control bylaw. Recommendation is that council approve the following resolution, that the District of Squamish receive the report from Community Services dated June 22nd, 2021, outlining the process to date and also the process and the progress to date regarding the animal control bylaw and review next steps. At this time, I thank you and open to questions.
Okay, thank you. Council, any questions? I'm just getting my screen up here. I can see everyone. So I have Councillor Herbert.
Thank you. I have a question just around the proposed timeline with council being not in session in August, which is generally done because it's hard to get things done in August. I'm curious about the work remaining and whether that early September will allow for the community engagement needed to make this project successful. And I was impressed with the numbers of engagement, just even listening to the presentation so far. So, and staff's thoughts on that September timeframe.
Through the chair, I didn't quite hear all of that question, but I believe it was regarding timing of bringing this back in the fall. If that was that the essence of the question?
Yeah, sorry, I'm speaking at the device now, so maybe this is better. But yeah, it's just that timing and getting this engagement done over the needed engagement done over summer and that early September timeline.
So in regards to, I believe it was also tied into the budgeting process through the chair. As far as the timing is concerned, we're allowing basically the month of July and also the first week into August to make sure people also maybe be on holidays for the August long weekend. So basically a 40-day engagement period to re-engage the proposed sites, and then staff would consolidate the information, make sure we have clearance on all the issues related to proposed sites. And also at that time, we will have time to revise the bylaws to reflect the responsibilities required in the off-leash areas. And as far as the budget is concerned, we will be in step with the budget process if there are any dollars required to in regards to capital for the off-leash parks and operationalize them for the spring of 2022. So we're quite comfortable with the timeline, and we believe it also gives the public a good 5 to 6 week window to provide feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Also? Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. I'm getting a sense from the staff report that early on there was a thought of having volunteer ambassadors as part of this initiative. And then as I read the more recent material, that looks to have been possibly de-emphasized. I wonder if you could just, is my sense correct on that, or am I reading too much into what's in front of us?
Through the chair to Councillor French, none of the items that were brought forward in the original report have been taken off the table. They're just part of they're just going to be added into the new information we receive. And so that's still part of the conversation we bring forward.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Councillor Stoner.
Just on the engagement piece that we foresee happening July to August, if things continue to go positively, we might see some further restrictions in gathering numbers and things like that. And at this point, we can't have 50 people outdoors. So I'm just curious what staff's engagement proposal is, if it's all still going to be online, or if there is opportunity to do some kind of intercept surveys or that sort of idea.
Through the chair to Council Stoner, currently it's all online, but as restrictions modify and so forth, we will adapt and we will look at maybe some alternative ways to engage with the public. But for now, for safety and to ensure we can get data back and forth, it's currently going to be online.
Okay, Council, if there's no more questions, there is a recommended motion before us. Mayor Elliott?
Well, I just want to follow up on Councillor Stoner's line of questioning. And so the public health orders allow us to do intercept surveys and that sort of thing. So is it a matter of capacity, or, so I don't really think it's a matter of safety. You can speak to someone from 2 meters away and you're outside, and you could host little feedback events in some of the areas that we're proposing. So I just want to check that.
Through the chair to Mayor Elliott, it has been noted when I meet with the communications team and we review that potential option, I'm sure we can find a way to make that work. We're not saying no to it, it's just that that wasn't part of our original plan. And now we can look at that and determine which is the most effective way of doing face-to-face engagement with the public, as you say, at certain spots, or through different ways of communicating with them through surveys. Thank you.
So, Mr. Page, can I clarify, were you asking for any feedback at this point, or just this is more of an update?
Through the chair, we're just asking you to accept this as information, and we're just wanting to make sure we let you know that we're about to re-engage with the public and bring this back to the forefront.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson?
I'd just like to echo the suggestion / concern just voiced by Mayor Elliott. I think that July and August is always a challenging time for community engagement. I also am familiar with one of the sites that's under discussion and proposed in the package, and familiar with the seniors group that uses that site regularly, and they are not online. They're not. Not all of our senior community are hooked up or plugged into Facebook and our other channels. So I strongly support the suggestion made, if I understand it correctly, to consider stationing interview opportunities at some of these sites. Thank you.
Council, I guess it's over to you if you want to recommend the resolution, some changes or not. Councilor French, are you moving? Councilor Ray seconds.
I'll speak to it.
Go ahead, Councilor French.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Speaking in favor of the staff recommendation, I'm happy to see this report now and that we're moving this forward as we start to catch up on some of the projects that had to be delayed due to the COVID-19 priorities that we've been dealing with. So there were no surprises for me in the feedback and the staff report, and I think this next round of consultation will further sharpen our understanding of the issues and potential solutions around off-leash dog issues. Dog owners and those who have anxiety around dogs will appreciate the certainty that we're moving into with the bylaw work that's ahead of us. So I'll be voting in favor of the motion.
Councillor Stoner?
Thank you, through the chair. I too will support this motion. Excited to see this come back, and the heads up that we're able to move this forward again now. Appreciate why it did have to be delayed. I will just reiterate that I do think some level of in-person engagement will be necessary, especially through the summer months. So I just want to make sure that that's kept on record here as part of my comments towards this motion, that I don't think online engagement through the summer is going to be sufficient at this point. So would like to make sure that staff incorporate that when it comes back to council in the fall. Thank you very much.
Councillor Herford?
Thank you. I'll be supporting the motion, and I do have some concerns around the engagement in the summertime. So I think that sorry. I do have some concerns around engagement through the summertime, and so that'll be a key part of my deliberation. considerations, my thought process that when this does come back to us is the quality of that engagement. So I think staff should have answers here today, and that's not necessarily specific to this project. It's a tricky time to get the engagement we need to make sound decisions for our community. So I'm sure there's ways around it through all the avenues we have, but we may need to sort of approach it with the mindset of doing extra to get to where we need to be. But supportive of this action this time. Thank you.
Councilor Rice.
Thank you. And just listening to the comments of my fellow councillors, you know, I'm sort of becoming more concerned about the engagement component of this. And we've always had difficulty with engagement over the summer on a whole variety of different issues. And so I'm wondering if and I'll leave it to staff to think about this, you know, whether September is a realistic date to bring it back, or whether to make sure we do it right, we think about doing it in October. I'm not sure that there's a real hard deadline to this. I think from my perspective, it's not so much getting it done quickly, it's getting it done effectively and getting it done right. And so whether it takes an extra month after this delay, I don't know that anything really hangs on that. So I'll leave it to staff to think about that possibility, just to make sure we do cover as much of the community as we can.
Thank you. I'm hearing myself.
Okay, I think we're okay now. A bit of an echo here. I will be supporting the resolution as well. Would share some of my colleagues' thoughts about engagement. The other piece that I noticed a bit, there was talk in the report about some of the reasons why we are doing this, so that at the end of the day there will be, as I understand it, less conflicts and better quality of life for animals and so on. And so I would appreciate in these sorts of reports seeing some sort of concrete measures of success if possible. Like we would expect a whatever % reduction in complaints or this sort of thing, just so we have a way to reflect back and say, did we succeed, or are we on track? Do we need to tweak it a little bit further? I think that sort of thing would be really helpful for me. But very pleased with the engagement to date and the community's participation. Looking forward to see the results to this in September or October. So with that, I will call a question. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. So thank you, and nice to see you, Mr. Sega. So we are, we're doing really well. If I didn't just think so. Are we ready for the quarterly financial? Yeah. We are, okay, so. Okay, I will welcome Mr. Russell to tell us about our quarterly financial report.
Good morning, Chair, members of Council. My name is Roland Russell. I will be sharing my screen shortly. As I figure out which one of these it wants me to click on, I believe it's this one. Okay, let's try that. Are you viewing a presentation?
Yes, we are.
Well, that's good. I wish I was too, but so bear with me for a moment because right now I don't actually see that presentation. So there we go. I think I see it and I think you see it. Good morning, Chair, members of Council. My name is Roland Russell. We are here to talk about the Q1 financial report. And so our agenda today is outline the report structure and the objectives, to give you a view of the Q1 financial report, and then to allow some time for discussion and questions. You have seen this report before. It is similar to the quarterly report that we have brought to you in 2020. So I will step through the outline and objective piece rather quickly, if you don't mind. There are three key areas in the report. We talk about the financial operating budget and, sorry, operating financial report, the special projects and the capital projects. Excuse me. In Appendix 1, we outline which cost centers roll up into which divisions. We show the information year to year in its comparison versus budget, and we provided you with graphs of that. We should note a couple of things. One is it says at the bottom of the slide, expenses are approximately a month behind or completion. That's just due to timing of getting invoices in and pushed through the system. The other piece that I'd like to note is that because this is Q1, with the budget being approved at the beginning of March, by the end of March, a lot of ongoing projects have continued and therefore there are spending, but a lot of new projects that were commenced in 2021 will not have a great deal of spending in Q1. That does not suggest that we are moving forward with the projects or that the projects are not underway. It's just due to the timing of budget approval and timing of placing RFPs, etc., that there is a slight delay there. So you will see a much more fulsome report later in the year when you start to look at Q2 and Q3. With respect to special and operating and capital projects, as per previous reports in Appendix 2 and 3, we outlined the various projects. The projects are categorized by the type of area that they support, so strategic plan, master plan, or municipal service projects. And in addition to that, we have Appendix 4, which outlines the procurement tender awards that have been given up in Q1. So no further ado, we will go to the operating results. And what we wanted to identify there is that, as I had said, there are timing differences that pop up in Q1 that will even themselves out over the year. I think one of the other aspects that we would like to remind Council of is that in Q1, finance is fairly focused on getting the budget complete and getting the previous year complete and moving forward with year end. So there are some entries that maybe are a bit slow on our update and ensuring that Q1 is as crisp and tidy as future quarters are. And I think as we move forward with our reporting systems and progress, we'll tighten that up over time. I think that one of the key elements here is that both operating revenues and expenses, both the general fund and the utility funds, are trending within acceptable ranges in all areas. There's nothing really untoward that has occurred in Q1 that we think will continue throughout the year that you need to be concerned or aware of at this point. With respect to the special operating projects, there are 89 individual projects in 2021 financial plan. As you can see on this slide, a large number of them, over 40, have not started yet. And that, again, that's just a timing matter to get between budget approval and getting underway with projects. You will see in future years in Q1, we anticipate that there will be more projects underway earlier in the year because the budget will be approved in December rather than in February. As you can see, there's one project complete, which is good news, and one also canceled or delayed. For capital projects, we have the same, and as you can see, there's a much larger number of capital projects that are in progress. Fewer of them are not started. Part of the reason for that is that capital projects tend to be multi-year projects, and so a lot of capital projects continue from one year to the next. So there is less of a delay required for budget approval because you're operating on an existing project. So we've outlined those items as you noted in Appendix 2 and Appendix 3. You have the listings, and we would be happy at this point to answer questions with respect to that. And at this point, I think I will stop sharing my screen and we'll go back to council as a whole. So that is our presentation, and we would like to open this to questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Council, any questions? Councilor Anderson.
Thank you. It is a question of that arises from the project list, special operating projects, municipal services projects. And I'll refer to item number 31, downtown entrance study, engineering. The comment is made, project deleted, included in error, presumably in this table. I wonder, Mr. Russell, if you could clarify the status of that project. Yes, the downtown entrance study.
If you would give me a moment to catch up to where you are, I will do my best. Yes, I can comment on that. I think that in this instance, there was some misinterpretation as to whether this project was to go forward in 21 or 22, and the project was included in 21, and later I was informed that it was the intent of engineering group to include this project rather in 2022 than in 2021. So it was simply, you know, as you noted on the previous slides, there are approximately 170 projects, and sometimes, you know, human nature, we trip up.
Very good.
Communication.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. As I recall, there was a related project that will be undertaken this year related to that entrance study. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, anything else? Councilor Stoner.
Yeah, also just a few questions on some project updates. The speed limit reduction pilot project says late 2020, but delayed. I'm just curious. I think we were waiting for some provincial approval to do that. I just wonder if there's been any advancement of that work, or if we know it can go ahead for this year.
Through the chair, Councillor Stoner, would you be kind enough to provide me with the number of that project so that we can?
Yeah, it's number 8
Okay.
on the project list.
Doesn't look like Mr. Lincoln is here.
Can you ask?
I believe, I'm wondering if Dora Gunn would happen to be available to speak to that.
I think we have Mr. Buxton on the session, and he might be.
Okay.
Yes, good morning. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that question on hand, but I'll get it for you ASAP.
That's totally fine. And then the other one was just with respect to Project 29, the Water Master Plan and Water Rate Study. And I'm just curious in terms of it will be deferred until meters are closer to being installed. I wonder what the new timeline is on that project based on water meter installation.
Through the chair, I can provide a bit of information on that. The water meters are close to being installed, but we need to collect a certain amount of robust data. So there's a bit of a lag there. So the project's delayed so we can collect enough data to inform the new model.
Yeah, no, that makes good sense. I just wasn't sure where we're at in terms of installation. So great. Thank you.
Most of them are done, Councillor Stoner. The tricky ones are the ones that are left. But it's data collection now.
Thank you. Councilor Reyes.
Thank you. And I was just looking for the pickleball project and I wondered if that is going ahead or not. It didn't seem to be listed one way or the other, at least unless I missed it.
Yeah, it is on here.
Apparently it is 83 in the list.
Yeah.
Oh, different page. Okay, I'll check it. Thank you.
Council, any further questions? Oh, Ms. Bachman?
Hi, through the chair. Thank you. Just in response to the pickleball, the commentary on the status of the project is for July completion.
So, thank you. So council looking for a mover. Council Hooper moves, Council Stoner seconds. Any discussion? Council Stoner?
I just want to thank staff for their continued efforts on the quarterly financial reports. They are an invaluable piece to our process, and especially the addition of the last section, Appendix 4, in terms of the contracts awarded. I think that that definitely achieves what it was that I was hoping to get from that kind of quarterly update as we increased the delegation authority bylaw. So thank you to staff for their ongoing work for this and the updates.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes, one of our an ongoing initiative that is highlighted in our strategic plan is the Marine Action Strategy implementation. And I'll just note, and this is really a work plan comment, is that we have not had an opportunity to discuss Marine Action Strategy implementation since July 2019. Some of the descriptions of the project are still a little bit unclear, as we haven't had a chance to discuss it in council, if you like. So I'll just pass on that note, and that relates to item number 24, Marine Action Strategy Administration Building. It's really not clear what that is, as we have 21 short-term recommendations in 4 broad focus areas that are identified for implementation during our term. So that's a long gap between presentations, is nearly 2 years. Thank you.
Okay. Not seeing any further hands, so I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? Not seeing anyone opposed, the motion carries. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now, before you go too far, Mr. Russell, we are ahead. We have an opportunity, I think, to do the capital planning. We have everyone we need. Or we prefer to wait. It's about a half hour on the agenda for that.
We would need some time to find staff to
Okay.
see if they are able to join us. So if we take a 5-minute recess, we can find staff. We find them, we can do it.
Would people like to try and squeeze that in now and say just come after lunch, or just take a long lunch? Hands for long lunch? No, one nodding. So I think then why don't we take 5 minutes and see if we can find the staff and try and get ahead of it again. So we'll be back at 11:25. Okay, and we're back from a quick break, and we are able to go ahead, so we're going to jump into the capital planning discussion for lunch. So I will turn it over to Mr. Russell again, please. And I think Mr. Russell is muted still.
Yes, I was. If you just give me a moment, I will share my screen and we can be underway.
Great, thank you.
Okay, hopefully you can see a presentation.
Not yet.
Oh, sorry. Well, that seems. Can you see the presentation at this point?
No, I'm afraid not.
Just hang on. Oh, sorry, I see.
There we go.
There, how about now?
Perfect.
Wonderful. Sorry about the delay. Good morning, members of council. Chairman Penegill. I'm going to run a little bit ahead of schedule, but let's just jump into capital planning. So, as I'm sure you're aware, Finance Department has been working on, in conjunction with Director of Infrastructure and the Manager of Real Estate, we've been working on producing a capital planning model to allow us to provide council with more information on how the real estate and facilities master plan projects fit into the overall capital structure that we have within the organization. So that's what we are going to outline today here. So today we're going to introduce the capital planning model. We'll describe the model output and give you a bit of an outline for the capital planning process. So we're going to start this by giving you an explanation of what is in the model and what okay. So in the capital planning model, the model is designed to cover the next 10 years, so roughly to the end of this decade, to 2030. So it's capital planned projects out to 2030. We include 2031 because projects that commence in 2030 may not finish until 2031. So it starts in 2022 because 2021 is actually underway already. So really, we're looking at this from a forward-looking perspective. What we've done is you will see that, if my mathematics are correct, we have approximately 208 million, I believe, worth of capital projects. We've broken them down into three categories. The three categories are REFMP projects, which are the REFMP projects that we have scheduled in the future. So that would be Brennan Park Wellness, library upgrade, and Brennan Park expansion. The REFMP priority projects are the 2 fire halls plus the public works building. And the general projects are basically everything else that would have debt funding involved or would be supported through use of our reserves. And as you can see, the split there is, $100 million in general projects, and then roughly like a little more than 50-50 on existing priorities and future priorities. The funding of these projects is roughly it's not quite exact, but it's about a 50-50 split between debt, reserves, and DCCs and grants. And then the allocation of DCCs and grants versus reserves is a little less than half and half. But in general, that's about the overall funding model, the picture that we're trying to shoot for is about 50% funded from debt and then roughly half and half between reserves and DCCs. And you could look at this from the perspective of DCCs and grants are external funding, land reserve is internal funding, and debt is deferred taxation. Okay. When we look, so these are the capital planning inputs that we are putting into the model. And now we're going to talk about what the outputs are. What we're trying to measure here for capital plan is tax impact. So tax impact is being measured in both the short and long-term average annual tax increase. So short-term will be over the remainder of the existing financial plan period. So that will be 22 to 26. Long-term would be taking the full 10-year increase and looking at that on an average increase year to year. These tax increases only reflect the impacts of capital projects. We are not attempting to factor in any adjustments in operating costs. This is a capital planning model, so it looks strictly at what the impact of our future capital plan is going to have on taxes, on debt, and on reserves and reserve capacity. With respect to debt, we look at the average debt issuance per year. And the reason that we're looking at the average debt issuance per year is it's going to be lumpy. Obviously, you're going to have bigger projects in some years, such as the fire hall or the public works building. In other years, you're not going to have such large projects, and the debt issuance in those years might just be for diking, for example, and may only be, you know, $4, $5, $6 million a year rather than 10 or 12. And the other aspect of this is also to look at the debt servicing percentage in 10 years. And the reason for that is Council has passed a policy to allow debt servicing, cap debt servicing at 20% of our revenue stream, even though the BC legislation allows us to go to 25%, to allow space for potential emergencies and to ensure that we don't get ourselves into any financial health issues. Council has provided a guideline of debt servicing cap of 20%. So at the end of 10 years, after we've looked at the building of all these buildings and the financing thereof, we'll be looking at what is the debt servicing ratio at that point, which has occurred. And that situation is that we've have some cost escalation in a couple of our priority projects. So within the public works facility, we're looking at a cost escalation of approximately 25% from $16 million to $20 million. And within Tantalus Fire Hall 2, we're looking at a similar 25% cost increase, I said, from $8 million to $10 million. And that $8 million reflects an increase in the budget of $1 million to allow for bulking of the foundation of Fire Hall 2 so that we would be able to build additional space above the Fire Hall building. The model results look like this. In the base scenario, we're looking at a 2.1% increase in tax over the short term, roughly, 2%, 1.9% over the longer term. We are using roughly, we are planning on issuing $110 million in debt, so $11 million a year, which would create a just under 15% cumulative debt servicing at the end of 2031. The land reserve impact would be roughly $15 million in the short term, 14.5, and overall about $55 million over the longer term. With the cost escalation, the decision was made to change the financing mix. And the reason that we changed the financing mix between debt and reserve financing for these facilities, to be fair, most specifically Fire Hall 2, is that we were looking at the combination of Fire Hall 1 and Fire Hall 2, and we were reviewing how much debt we had issued, and we felt that we were aiming for a 2/3 debt, 1/3 cash kind of ratio. And we were getting out of step with that, with those numbers for the two fire halls combined. Perhaps primarily because we had seen some larger than anticipated cost escalation against the second fire hall. And also in the first fire hall, we had made a decision early in the process to cap the debt financing at $10 million. So as a result of that, we've issued additional debt over, it was our plan to issue additional debt in the 22 through 26 financial plan, approximately $8 million, to fund this increase in pricing. So now we're going to be looking at a total debt financing of around $118 million. That would push our debt limit up to about 15%. It would push the, it would push the average tax increase over the short term to 2.4%, 2% on average over the long term. And the other net impact is it would reduce the amount of land reserve requirement or in the short term to 12.9 million. So this is just to give you an example of how changing costs, changing projects, adding additional debt, changing the funding from one source to another source is going to impact the model outputs. What you'll note here is that all of the shades on the bottom line there are all green, which is good because we are not in any jeopardy within our existing capital planning model. The results all point to a good place for us to be today and into the future, even though costs are escalating on some of our larger projects. Want to give you an overview of the remainder of the capital planning process, and the overview in the remainder of the capital planning process would be that we are in the early summer, and this will be an ongoing time frame in general. We will be providing the capital plan model to council. We'll be asking council to provide direction and guidance on the creation of the 5-year plan. Over the summer, the district will prepare the 5-year financial plan, and in the fall, we will be bringing back both the 5-year financial plan and we will update the capital planning model to reflect the information contained within that 5-year plan. So you can see today where we are, very good situation. And as we move into the 5-year plan, we're going to add more projects, change projects, these types of things. And then in the fall, we'll bring you back a new plan. And in addition to bringing you back the new plan, we will also be able to show you how that new plan fits within the overall capital planning model. Lastly, hope that we've done a reasonably good job of explaining how all of this works. And so at this point, we would like to say a couple of questions that we could direct. Is there anything that in the model that's not clear or that you would like additional explanation? And is there any information that is missing that could assist council in better understanding the finances and the financial meanderings of the capital plan and how all that stuff fits together? So that is the end of my presentation, and I am going to stop sharing my screen. I'd like to say thank you very much, and at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Russell, for that presentation, and I have a question from Councilor Riggs.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. And I'm looking at the pie chart in page 95 of 101 of the staff report, and it shows almost half the projects general projects over the 22 to 31 period of 100 million and change, which includes things like diking and so forth. And so what I'm wondering, and for example, you know, a significant portion of that I would expect would be the dike project that runs along by the Easter Seal camp and up into Brackendale, and the realignment of the road and so forth, which I think came to us at, you know, potentially around $100 million by itself over 10 or 15 or 20 years even. But, you know, with projects like that, in diking, for example, we tend only to spend what we have, in the sense that we might have a $5 million project and apply, for example, for a $3 million grant. And if we get the grant, we'll spend 5. And if we don't get the grant, we would only spend 2, which is what we had sort of put aside from municipal funding. And so I'm wondering, with this model, does it take into account that kind of approach to these different projects? In other words, sometimes I know when they go into the financial plan, the gross number is there. In other words, the cost of the project, and then we hope we get some funding for it. It has to go into the financial plan, I guess, is the big number. We hope some of it comes from some senior government granting or something. But the reality is we're never going to spend out of our own resources the larger number. At least we haven't in the past. There may be exceptions to that, but generally we don't spend the larger number. And I'm just wondering if this modeling kind of takes that into account. Are we setting aside a certain amount for a year that would be the municipal contribution? And is that what this reflects, or does this reflect the gross numbers?
The numbers in the model show both. So we have both the total dollar amount. So as an example, what we've shown is the historic number is about $4 million a year, split 50-50 between our spending and grant spending. So what we've included in the model is $2 million of debt financing per year and $2 million of grant financing per year. So when you look at the funding aspect of this, it would show roughly $40 million over the next 10 years. And that will be split more or less $20 million of debt financing and $20 million of grant financing.
And that's what's basically shown in your charting.
Yes. Yeah. So then the debt finance portion obviously is going to impact future taxes because we're going to have to repay the debt. And the grant finance portion does not have a direct impact on taxation.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stoner, I see a hand. Council, any more questions on the capital plan? Mayor Elliott?
So Mr. Russell, in the diagram, when it talks about the tax impact over 5 years and 10 years, that's not an annual tax impact, is the average over the whole term.
So that is the annual average. So if we say 2.4%, that means 2.4% every year for the next 5 years, a total increase of 12%.
What is our annual increase for like our non-discretionary tax increases? What would be the average over the last few years?
I'm going to suggest that on the operating side, so if you would exclude the financing components of the capital plan, the non-discretionary has probably been in the order of 3% to 4%. Some of that will be offset by growth, but yeah, probably in that 2 to 3% range, I would think.
So I'm just trying to be clear for council and the public that these numbers, like you have them in green, but in my mind, it's screaming yellow. It may be orange because I'm adding the operational side to this.
That is a fair comment. This is strictly looking at the capital plan. And I guess what, one of the big messages here is with the real estate and facilities master plan being completed and looking at the size and nature of the projects that we are bringing forward, and including that with all of the other projects that we take on, that we do normally, we're looking at $220 million worth of capital spending in the next 10 years. And that is going to have a very significant impact on the taxes within the district of Squamish, where, the base tax number here on the capital side is looking at something around 2% per year on average over the next decade.
That's what happens when you don't invest in infrastructure over time and you leave it all to decline and become obsolete at the same time.
More or less, but
yeah,
that is what it is, I guess.
So another question is that we can see the cost escalations, and certainly the pandemic has exacerbated things like the cost of lumber, let's say. So would we contemplate delaying some of these projects to get past those extreme price events? They're cyclical and are expected to decline.
I would have to defer that question to Mr. Bragg, who I think would be able to answer it better than I.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. The answer is yes, we are looking at that, and specifically to answer that on lumber. Lumber started to come down from its peak, which is great. And this is the difficulty where we're weighing in, we're looking at reducing carbon in our builds here, in particular structural lumber, which is a low-hanging fruit. But if the lumber prices are so high and it's pushing our numbers to build up so high, then we have to revert back to steel. But if we're going to revert back to steel, the issue there is that the carbon numbers get boosted up, and we really put that 2030 CCAP numbers in jeopardy. So there's a bit of a yin and yang here. The architects and the designers that we're working with are well aware of the costs. We're looking at hybrid models. We are looking at timing differences. So yeah, it's all on the table, Mayor, for sure.
Oh, there was one more question. Oh, so this doesn't contemplate sort of creative things we could do. So if we sold the airspace above a new muni hall, so put like 2 floors of market housing and a floor of affordable housing to pay for the office space we need below. That kind of creative project idea hasn't been included. This is just a straight building.
Through the chair, good question. It has been contemplated. It's in our back of our mind when we're looking at the dispositions, and particularly the muni hall is a good option there. Well, we've got a few options in our back pocket of what we can do. If we sell a certain chunk of land, then we're going to get more money back, and we're going to reduce the impact on the taxpayer. So all that kind of is part of the process that we're working with. Ones like the fire halls being an emergency building, it's pretty straightforward, and it's basically a straight through, and there's no outside of the box thinking on that one, where it's very black and white. But the ones we can play with a little bit is the muni hall. Again, Public Works is the same thing. It's pretty straightforward. It's a box building, trying to do other areas of reducing costs outside of the norm. I'm not sure if we're going to reduce the return on investment there. Our focus should be getting the cheapest construction and the not so much the cheapest, well, it is the cheapest construction, but it's also the confidence in moving through. And the numbers that we're presenting now, we don't want any scares or any other come back to council moments in a year's time saying, hey, we're short on the funds at the moment. So what we're trying to do now is predict the cost as accurately as we can to move forward and give confidence in the numbers that we're presenting at the moment.
And it talks in the staff report about the public works yard needing to be 20% bigger, I'm not sure the yard, but whatever we're building there. Can you talk about what's driving that change?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. The main overview here is when we're doing the numbers, we brought on a third-party consultant, a quantity surveyor, to do the numbers, and it was 2018, 2019. Since then we've had COVID. COVID, we're not hanging our hat on as an excuse for why the costs have gone up, but things have changed since then. The number of FTEs that we're looking at pre-COVID has changed. the actual growth that we're anticipating has changed slightly, and we're building now the public works facility to a size to fit within the next 5 years. We're not building it to right now. And the reason that we've moved a little bit specifically is there's additional subdivisions and parks that have come on board. There's additional fleets, vehicles in the fleet that wasn't in there previously. There's additional managers. We've actually now moving facilities into the public works facility as well. There's additional programs like the water meters and the business cases for in-house work for sewer line cleaning. There's additional mill rights. So there's things that have changed slightly in the outlook of how public works is run. It looks like we've got a 27% increase in the number of staff that we're looking at, or FTEs that we're looking at, and yet we've compacted the growth of the square foot down to 20%. So even though we've increased, we're actually cutting it fine. So when we looked at the overall size of this building back in the RFMP stage, when the report was being written, they look at it as like an overview. We call it a Class D, which is just a square foot overview. Whereas now we've really intrinsically dove in, where the architects have been interviewing employees, they've been interviewing the department head. We've really got in to really assess what the needs of public works are. And unfortunately, we are 20% over on the square foot from when we initially looked at it from the massing stage.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. A few questions, but just a quick clarification there. Mr. Bragg, you said a 27% increase in FTEs in public works. That's just a shift from one location to another. That's not hiring 27% more FTEs, correct?
No, it's a shift, correct.
Just wanted to clarify that one. So my question was around just kind of the breakdown of the funding for the capital plan, and this goes a little bit to, I think, Councillor Reese's question. I was a little bit surprised at how low the percentage was for DCC and grant funding through all of this, given that I appreciate that there isn't really much grant funding available for like core priorities of the municipality, like fire halls and public works yards. Those are difficult to get grants for, but I think the majority of our discussions to date around some of the other real estate and facilities master plans have been that they will only go forward if there's grant funding available. So can staff maybe just speak a little bit to like that breakdown of anticipated grant funding versus DCC funding for this capital plan?
Yes, through the chair. I believe I can answer that question for you, Councillor Stoner. What we're seeing happening here over time is we're getting to a fairly standard, trying to find the right terms here, getting to a fairly standard picture of what that pie is going to look like on a longer term basis. It's going to be about half debt, and it's going to be about 50-50 internal, external funding. And the reason is we have a lot of DCC projects, but DCC projects tend to be shared, cost shared projects. So if you look at, for example, Oceanfront, it's a lot of that's 50-50 split. So we put in half and the developers will put in half. So a lot of that happens to be the same for grants. So what we're seeing is certain types of infrastructure, namely things like diking, assistance on road building, those types of things can be funded through grants, can be funded through DCCs, and it tends to be about a 50-50 split. So depending on whether that is something sponsored by the utilities, which have a little deeper pockets on the reserve side, or by the general fund, which might have to rely a little more on debt, you're going to get that split of around 50% DCC and 50% debt. And then when you look at the buildings that we are building, the REFMP sites, we're trying to align that similarly, where we're looking to bring in roughly 2/3 debt and say 1/3 of our own reserve financing. And as a result of that, that's kind of how you see that pie shape out, is it's about a quarter debt and grant funding, sorry, DCC and grant funding. It's about a quarter internal funding, which is being funded by our reserves, and it's roughly half that's being funded by debt. And I hope that is answering the question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And then my other question was just to pick up on Mayor Elliott's point in terms of kind of the setting a minimum for the average annual tax impact. And this is what happens when you postpone a lot of this really important work in terms of reinvesting in our facilities. But I guess, is there a point at which we do a bit of due diligence in terms of, are there some of these projects that we do postpone for longer, whether it's within the real estate and facilities master plan or in the other capital plan in terms of other capital plan priorities like diking and things like that, to make that tax impact more manageable?
This is why we come to council to seek direction, okay, through the chair. That's not really a question I can answer. I think that's a question that you have a discussion amongst yourselves and provide us with the direction you would like us to proceed in. Obviously, there are other levers that can be pulled by the district. You know, if it is your desire to see a lower overall tax impact of capital projects, then you know we can look at things like delaying projects.
Thank you.
Mr. Russell, I have an echo.
You do.
It's because you're unmuting yourself.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I have a quick question, then I'll go to Councilor Race. So just trying to wrap my head around the real estate facilities master plan, REFP priority versus just the regular ones. So I understand the priority ones are, you know, it's the fire halls, it's the definite short-term impact on this plan. But the non-priority ones, like the wellness center and so on, my sense is there, I guess I'm trying to get how much of a certain impact do they have on the next 10 years? And in my mind, there's more flexibility for us to push them out, but also more ability for us to fund them mostly from grants, or to wait until it's mostly funded by grants. Whereas some of the other things, there isn't that grant opportunity like for the fire halls. Is that correct, or can you speak to how much, I guess, wiggle room we have in terms of the non-priority REFP projects?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, I can. So I will do my best. We've included a wellness center project that was at the request of council due to a council resolution to apply for a grant in 2021 through 2025 capital plan. Speaking to Mr. Bragg and in referencing the REFMP, speaking to Mr. Bragg about building condition, I guess would be the best way to put it. If that grant doesn't come through, building that wellness center in 2024, 2025 would not be the district's #1 priority at that time. So that project would probably be delayed, as an example. Certainly, we have other projects in there in the later years, in the second half, sort of the second 5-year span, 27 through 31. Brennan Park expansion, upgrade or movement of the library, and again, then this wellness center, which would, you know, if we don't get the grant, will be pushed into the second half. And clearly, if it was council's desire to fund these projects through grants as opposed to debt or internal funding, then we could put the project, we could change the funding, and we could put the project in the plan with the proviso that if we get the money, we will go forward with the project. Such as an example, such as the way we're dealing with the wellness center right now. If the grant doesn't come through for the wellness center, I would anticipate that the district, you know, administration will move the wellness center's timing further out. because it is not the next priority project that we would be undertaking. We have moved it up solely to attempt to get the additional funding that may be available at this time. So yeah, we do, and I'm not suggesting that we chase grants, but when we see opportunities to get grants, we certainly would endeavor to do so. And you know, we're really fortunate to have someone like Mr. Ralston, who's exceptionally successful at getting those grants for us. So yeah, we would be looking at those types of things if there is a desire from council to lessen the impact on taxes.
Thank you, Councilor Race.
Yeah, interesting on that point. I mean, we actually went through that last term with the Wellness Center when we applied for a grant, did not get it. And so obviously didn't go ahead with it. It was one that was contingent on a grant. But I had my hand up just on this discussion around the point that the mayor raised about, you know, if we add 2% of capital funding to our sort of non-discretionary budget items, we very quickly start hitting, I guess all of us individually will have a limit on where we'd like to see our tax increases. But we've been able to get away with lower tax increases lately because of the growth in the tax base. And this year was 6%, which is actually, in my history, is quite extraordinary. But going back years, it's been typically, you know, 2-3% when the economy's been good. But I think, and so for me personally, that's how we can manage that number, is because it does reduce the impact of the taxpayer. And if that ever stopped, if the tax base ever stopped growing, then a lot of these things are funded by, or not funded, but driven by growth. And so I think then future councils would have the option for a lot of them of just pausing them until the economy got to the point and the growth in the community got to the point where now it's time to expand some more. And there's exceptions to that, of course. Key infrastructure projects, as the mayor pointed out, we can't delay those. But I think we do have some flexibility going forward. And the growth that we're seeing right now does give us some of that flexibility. And if it stops, then we just step back for a second so we don't overburden the taxpayer. And so I'm comfortable going forward with this kind of a plan with that in the back of my mind. That's how it would actually unfold probably. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Nutt. Oh, Mayor Elliott.
I'm sorry if I missed this. What is the assumed growth rate that we've used in this model?
The assumed growth rate is, through the chair, the assumed growth rate is 3%.
Okay, and then when will we, to the CAO, when will we have an update on funding options for the Brennan Park expansion and revitalization? We were looking at a foundation model and other fee structures.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. I'll have to speak to staff to find out exactly where that particular project is at, and we can get back to council with the timing.
Thanks. I think it's important to understand how that sort of comes into the mix with this model as it moves forward. Would it, I guess what I'm struggling with Mr. Russell is sort of the principles that are driving this capital plan and trying to have a crystal ball into the future. And then also managing our tax increases. But yeah, I guess when does the creative part about trying to fund some of our bills by selling airspace, when does that come into the conversation that would impact this model?
Through the chair, when we bring in new projects, those projects could incorporate any number of alternate space plans chase patterns, let's say, okay? And I think it will be at that point in time that you would start to see these types of impacts. So as an example, and I also think that certain parcels of land, certain properties are more conducive to doing those types of things than others, as an example. So I think that there are certain facilities that, you know, when we bring forward a specific facility, like Municipal Hall, for example, which is an office building for all intent and purposes, those types of facilities might be more conducive to that, as Mr. Braga pointed out, than say a fire hall. So I think that we are not eliminating options at this stage. I think it's more a case of when the facility comes forward in the plan, at that point in time, administration would have to be looking at what are the various options. So I can't speak to that per se at this moment, because I don't know what all the items are going to be in the next financial plan, but I would anticipate that in the 22 to 26 financial plan, I would hope that we see some additional facilities, and as a result of that, I would anticipate that, you know, there may be some additional. You had a really good term, and I'm trying to remember what it is. Interesting, and interesting was not the term, but initiatives. Some inventive initiatives, I believe, was the term that you used. So hopefully, as we move forward and look at the next financial plan, you'll see different projects, and within those different projects, there may be different methodologies being applied.
Right. That's why I'm wondering if we need sort of a principle that we will maximize opportunities to reduce the impact on the taxpayer in our capital planning. And I know, for instance, there's municipalities that are using the airspace above their public works yard to allow industrial users to pay for storage. And so it's a way, you know, we've got a big land base there. Industrial storage is at a premium, but we can use our airspace above the public works yard to do that and create a bit of income to offset the cost. So I think those are the types of things that I want to make sure that we're thinking about, is reducing the impact on the taxpayer and maximizing what can be done on any piece of land, because we've put in our growth management boundary. We want to stay and create density. But that means we have to be, I think, more creative in how we see each individual property and what's possible there, so that we're maximizing the return for the community, but minimizing the impact to the taxpayer.
Okay, I'm going to go to Ms. Glendale, and then I'll go to Councillor Stoner.
Thank you very much for this discussion. I do appreciate it. I think what's important to clarify is that minimizing the impact on the taxpayer is currently a principle. So I would like the public to know that this isn't a new principle, but what would be new would be different ways of creating or lessening that impact that perhaps hasn't been done before. And staff have heard loud and clear and are thinking about different ways within our capabilities to make that happen, and we can keep council posted with that.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I just have two clarifying questions. One from following on from the mayor. Mr. Russell, you said the model includes an assumption of 3% growth. Is that year over year? And so the tax impact accounts already for that potential anticipated growth in tax revenue? It would still be a 2% year over year.
Through the chair, it is somewhat circular. It's not circular, I should say. It's more one follows after the other. So when we're calculating a prospective tax increase in future years, that is being incorporated. So when I say we're anticipating a 3% tax increase, where we're going is we're thinking in any given year, the tax will probably go up by 3%. Okay, so our tax revenues go up by 3% year to year to year. So does that reflect the fact that 2.5% or 2% of that might be related to capital? Yes. And does that leave a little bit of room for other areas that could be increasing? Yes, it does. That being said, to the mayor's comment earlier, historically, that operating cost has been more than 1%. So, I mean, I think to Councillor Race's comment, when we start to add these up, we might be looking at 4 if we add capital and operating impacts. That might be the number we're looking at. And right now we can't say because I don't know what the operating piece is going to look like, and we would have to factor that in. Okay.
Got it. Thank you. And then my other clarifying question was just, we've referenced Municipal Hall quite a bit, but it's not explicitly listed in the capital plan spending. So is it under a priority project or just a real estate and facilities master plan project?
Through the chair, Municipal Hall is not in the current 5-year financial plan. And it is also not in this model because that is what we're trying to delve into and figure out where to put it.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Councilor Race. We do have to start again at 1, so let's think about some time.
Thank you. I'll be quick. And it's just this thing about airspace and Mr. Bragg's comment that not every building can take something on top of it or any function. But airspace for me, and I'm not an expert on this, can be one of 2 things. One is you actually build out the airspace on site. The other is you sell your airspace to an adjoining property owner. And the classic example of that in the city of Vancouver is the church that's at Burrard in Georgia sold its airspace to the development next door. Obviously, they don't want to build above the church. It's kind of a classic old structure, but they got a significant amount of money from the developer next door who got some increase in density on that project. And the city of Vancouver basically, in approving that project, averaged the density over the 2 sites. So it takes a little bit, and I mention it here because if we are going to start thinking about those types of innovative ideas, I think planning has to kind of figure out where and how much we could afford to transfer density and what, because somebody else gets more density than current zoning might allow, and does that work for us either? So it takes kind of a little bit of a wider view of that, but I think it is worth looking at. I mean, the density above Brennan Park, for example, if you put a building across the street from it somewhere, you know, it could be quite huge if you take some of the density and you average it over the 2 sites. So there's all kinds of different opportunities there, but we would need kind of a bit of a planning look at that to have that actually function. And it may be this is something we want to take a look at, considering we've got these upcoming future funding decisions. Thank you.
Councilor Anderson.
Chair, if it's appropriate, I'd just like to offer a comment. There are 3 items in the real estate and facilities master plan, which are not necessarily in the financial plan. And Mr. Russell has spoken to the wellness center at Brennan Park. The others are neighborhood hubs and the library project. Each of these 3 projects involves cultural space in varying ways. We have, since the real estate and facilities master plan has been completed, we've also undertaken the arts, cultural, and heritage strategy, which outlines some tactics, or if you like, action items regarding planning for cultural space. Unfortunately, the timelines suggested in that strategy may not be practical for us, and they are towards the end of the next decade. that we get started on it. And the two items are 6.3 and 6.4. Just briefly, 6.3, let's integrate our planning within the community. And there are 4 broad categories of stakeholders involved, the district being one of them. And the other one is 6.4, develop cultural space targets. My comment I'd like to make here is that it's actually would be advantageous for us to advance this discussion regarding implementing those 2 tactics for the purposes of our financial planning. Mr. Russell has spoken to the Wellness Center and grant opportunities. These may come along also for these other ones. The neighborhood hubs are in fact part of our ongoing planning initiatives, for example, Garibaldi Estates. So my suggestion is that we may give some consideration to suggest sending signals to the other partners in the Arts, Cultural, and Heritage Strategy implementation that we might get started at least on the integrated planning so that we can start to put together a picture that relates to not only the financial plan, but also fine-tuning the nuances or building those nuances within the real estate and facilities master plan. As we've discovered during conversations about each of these projects, there are cultural space implications and unsettled questions and conversations that really haven't gotten started. So that's my general point, that there are cultural spaces involved in 3 at least of these facilities that we're talking about, and that we need to get started on advancing our planning dialogue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Also, any more questions? Otherwise, there is a motion to receive the report. Councilor Herford.
I was going to move the staff recommendation.
Okay, Councilor Herford moves. Is there a second? Councilor French, any discussion? Councilor Herford.
Thank you. I really appreciate this this model, and it really gives us a pause. And I think that in relation to the possible impacts of these of the real estate facilities master plan in particular, and highlights the need to have more of these discussions around those creative, finding those opportunities, airspace or otherwise, and making sure that we really are maximizing the opportunities that are available to us. So I think this model is already doing its job, and I look forward to using it as a tool to help us with our decision-making process moving forward. So thank you to everyone involved with the project.
Anyone else? Mayor Elliott.
I'm really glad actually that we are finally looking at a long-term capital plan. It's been, again, another missing piece, I think, of the financial picture for the district. And I think one of the reasons that assets do fall behind in terms of their maintenance and planning, because we're not looking far enough out. So I definitely appreciate the effort that's gone into this, and I think it's a good starting point. I know that each of these facilities is going to come to us as a project. And I think what will be really important for the public is that we share with them all the different ways we imagine this facility so that it's really transparent for the public about what we contemplated to reduce the impact on the taxpayer, but also maximize each site and its uses, and how it relates to the growth of our community, as well as current services that need to be provided. So I think this conversation has just started with our community. I think today helps them see that this is a huge impact that will be with us for the next decade and probably longer. But I think it has to be an ongoing dialogue. And so I think about how we will do our budget engagement this year. And I think this needs to be part of that conversation so that we're always coming back to this huge unmet need in our community that wasn't planned for by a whole bunch of previous councils. And now we're trying to get caught up to that. So I just really want to encourage our thinking in that direction as a council and as a staff about how we make sure that we're never surprising the community with the price tag that comes with all of these projects over the next 5 to 10 years. But happy to receive this this model and move forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add a couple of comments. I'm fairly comfortable with the priority REFMP items. We know we need to proceed with them. That just a small side note that some of the discussion I've seen online want to be clear that Angeles Fire Hall, we are considering a new building, not building condos on top of what's there now. And I do, I always come back to when I think about, we are very fortunate in Squamish, and so for me, it's going to be really important to think very carefully about the timing of non-priority REFMP items and how we fund them and when we decide to proceed with them. I think that's the piece for me where there's some maybe more thought to do, and I look forward to further discussions on that. But I'm happy to support what we have before us now. So with that, I will call a question. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Okay, Council, we have a slightly shorter recess. We have to start at 1 o'clock. So please make sure you're here right on time. Then we have done an excellent job this morning, though, so we may have a little bit more flexibility after some of the special business meeting items. So I will call a recess and see you back at 1 o'clock. Thank you.